Hey there, my name is Jenny. Today I'm going to tell you an extraordinary story of how all my financial troubles are gone. I'm an only child. My dad is an only child, and my mom is also, except for her friends, whom I call Aunt because they're all so close, just like family. Dad and Mom's 20th wedding anniversary was coming up, and although I'm 15, my parents felt that I needed to stay with someone since they would be gone for a week in Jamaica. Although I told them that I was old enough to take care of myself, I wouldn't mind getting out of town myself. My parents went down the line of potential people that I could stay with. Aunt Jessica was going on a business trip, so she was unavailable. They would have asked their married friends, John and Paula, but they just recently moved over 400 miles away. My mom then turned to my dad and gave him a straight face and a nod that only he would recognize. They both knew there was only one last person they could consider taking care of me, my grandpa. You see, my dad and grandpa don't have the best relationship. In fact, I don't think they've seen each other in over 5 years, even though they live in the same city. I asked my dad many times in the past why he and grandpa don't get along, but my dad likes to keep pretty silent about it. However, I've been able to gather a few details. For one, my dad's mom died when he was very young, and he was raised almost entirely by his dad. It sounds like my dad's mom was the sweetest lady you could imagine, always making breakfast in the morning and always tucking him in at night. She didn't just read him bedtime stories, she acted them out. However, my dad's dad was the complete opposite. I think he was loving, but didn't know how to show it. You see, he was in the military for many years, and when he came back to take care of my dad, he brought that strict military life back with him. It seems like he had very high expectations for my dad that my dad would never be able to fulfill. All in all, it seems like my grandpa is disappointed in my dad, and my dad feels like he can never get his approval. Anyway, I guess you can say I don't have the best relationship with my grandpa either. Because the last time I saw him, I was so little that I can't even remember what he looks like. And you know, he's not exactly the type to send Christmas cards with a picture of himself, so I really don't know what he looks like at all. After talking about it, it seems like my mom and dad agreed that Grandpa was the only choice. So their anniversary week came, and we're all silent in the car as we're driving to Grandpa's house. I could tell my dad was nervous, which made me nervous. My dad never mentioned any stories about Grandpa physically hurting him, so I knew I would be okay. I just don't want Grandpa to yell at me the whole week and treat me like he treated my dad as a child. As we arrived at Grandpa's house, Dad told us to wait in the car. My dad walked up to the house looking a little uneasy. He seemed to even hesitate ringing the doorbell, but when he did, Grandpa opened the door almost immediately. They talked outside for a couple of minutes, and you can tell my dad's body language that he felt inferior to my grandpa. My dad's shoulders were hunched over, his feet were facing inward a little, and his hands were in his pockets. My dad then waved me over, signaling me to come out of the car. As I was walking up to them, I tried not to make eye contact with Grandpa. But as I got closer, I looked up and to my surprise, I saw a grin on Grandpa's face. He opened up his arms and gave me a hug. He then shook my dad's hand, and just like that, my dad walked back to the car and drove off, leaving me all alone with Grandpa. Grandpa invited me into the house. As I walked inside, I realized just how big this house was. The ceiling in the entry room was probably 30 feet high. There were 2 staircases on each side and large picture frames. My mouth was wide open in awe. Grandpa then looked over at me and said to close my mouth or a fly might go in. He then gave a slight grin. Was he joking? Was he giving me a command? I really don't know. Either way, I did as he said and closed my mouth. I want to stay on his good side. He then gave me a piece of paper with all the rules of the house. Dinner would be at 6. and I was to show up 5 minutes early. There would be no running inside the house. If it looked important, I wasn't allowed to touch it. And if he called me, I wasn't allowed to just yell, "What?" from another room. I had to walk to wherever he was. There were more rules, but I'll spare you the details. He then gave me a tour of the house. He showed me all his medals and pictures of him when he was in the military. I was actually very interested. My grandpa was a real war hero. I started asking him questions like, was he scared? Did he ever shoot anyone? Did anyone ever shoot him? Did he lose any friends in the war? Each question was not answered with a simple yes or no, but with an in-depth story. He really gave me a completely new perspective of what it was like to fight in a war. He said it wasn't for the glory or honor. He said he fought to protect his fellow men beside him. They were like family to him. He says the hardships they endured together made them closer than brothers. This became the bonding point between Grandpa and I over the next week. We sat down with each other as he would tell me his war stories. I felt like I got to see every side of Grandpa. The brave side, where he fought even though the odds were against him. The strong side, where he would let nothing get in his way. As well as the caring side, where he would risk his own life for another man. And his sad side, where he would spend countless nights crying because of all the friends he lost in the war. He said most of the stories that he told me, he's never told anyone before. He looked at me with the most loving grin, but that grin was wiped away as he looked down. He told me he had a secret, one that he's never shared with family yet. He told me that his health was deteriorating. He said he would be surprised if he was still living in 3 years from now. I couldn't believe this. I've never had a grandpa around my whole life. I only got to talk with him for a week and now he might die soon? I wondered why he was even telling me this. We were just so happy a minute ago. Why would he choose to tell me this now? But then he said he has another secret. He said in the nearby forest, he had $500,000 buried in a suitcase. No one knew where the suitcase was, and he figured no one would ever find it. He said he made a map with clues that would lead to the suitcase. Only someone that knew him really well would be able to solve these clues. He was planning on keeping this map in his wallet until the day he died. He said he only wanted his money to go to someone if they loved him, and only someone who loved him would know how to answer the clues. He then reached into his back pocket, grabbed his wallet, opened it, and pulled out the map, which was neatly folded into a square. He then looked at me with loving eyes and told me he wanted to give me the map. I was speechless. My mouth was wide open. He then smiled and said, "I better close my mouth or a fly might go in." We both laughed and I gave him a big hug. Later that night, when I was laying in the bed in the guest room, I was reflecting on all the memories I had with Grandpa that week. I wasn't even sure if I wanted my parents to pick me up the next morning. I was having so much fun talking with Grandpa. I then looked over at the map that was still folded that I left on my dresser. Grandpa said that I would be able to solve the clues if I loved him, but I only knew him for a week. Would I really be able to answer the questions? I opened the map and read the clues. They were all related to the stories he told me about the war. How many friends died? How many nights he cried? How many days he was held a prisoner? The numbers correlated to how many feet I should travel in a direction, and I knew all the answers. I couldn't believe he was giving his inheritance to me. The next morning, as my parents arrived to pick me up, I hugged my grandpa goodbye and told him I love him. With a warm tone, he said, "I know. That's why I gave you the map." And just like that, I smiled as I walked to my parents' car. 4 months passed by, and life was back to normal. I was living with my parents and was planning on seeing Grandpa again very soon. Until one day, my parents were informed that Grandpa had passed away. And out of everyone, it hit me the hardest. I cried in my room for days. And I then overheard my parents in a conversation, and my dad seemed devastated. I put my ear up to the bedroom door and tried to listen in. My dad was shocked to learn he hardly received any inheritance money. He knew my grandpa was wealthy and just considered it another slap in the face, another sign of grandpa's disappointment in him. I knew my dad loved him. He spent so many years trying to please him. They just never saw eye to eye. I then thought back to the map that led to the suitcase with $500,000. My grandpa gave this map to me because he thought I was the only one who loved him. Grandpa thought that only someone who loved him would know the answers to the clues on the map. I knew my dad would not be able to answer the questions because Grandpa said most of the stories he's never told anyone else but me. But deep down, I knew my dad loved my grandpa. So is this map really meant for my dad too? Guys, I really need your help here. I want to honor my grandpa's wishes, but I also know my grandpa didn't know how much my dad loved him. Tell me in the comments what you guys think. I really need your help on this one.